So imagine you're walking across the installation, right?
Okay.
The sun is in your eyes. You're mentally running through, your massive to-do list for the day, and you see a commissioned officer approaching on the sidewalk.
Right. Standard everyday occurrence.
Exactly. So you pop a sharp salute, they return it, walk past, and a split second later, your stomach just completely drops.
You realize what you did.
Yeah. You realize the thread on their OCP rank insignia, it wasn't spice brown, it was black.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You just treated a lieutenant colonel like a second lieutenant. And, that split-second mistake, it isn't just oops, in the military ecosystem, that is a massive failure of visual discipline. It means you aren't reading your environment.
And I mean, that kind of misidentification happens constantly when individuals rely on rote memorization instead of actually understanding the visual language of the force.
Yeah.
The whole system logic of the military is entirely built on these rapid, high-stakes visual and procedural cues. When you miss them, the system just breaks down.
Which brings us to today's topic. Welcome to another deep dive. And if you're tuning in today, there's a really good chance you are gearing up for the technical sergeant promotion cycle. Today, we are opening up the blue suit files.
We are.
We're executing a highly condensed, intensely analytical crash course of Air Force Handbook 1, specifically zooming in on chapters 22, 23, and 24. But here's the catch for you listening. We are completely ignoring the basic trivia today.
Right. No flashcards today.
No flashcards.
We really have to establish the operational framework for this analysis first. The Airman Development and Testing Chart, the ADTC, that dictates the cognitive depth required for promotion.
Right.
For a staff sergeant trying to make tech, the Air Force no longer cares if you have achieved Level A comprehension. Like, Level A is just remembering facts. It's the absolute baseline.
It's just rote memorization.
Exactly. We are strictly focusing on Level B, which is understanding and interpreting the relationship logic between rules, and Level C, which is applying those rules to execute leadership decisions in, real-world scenarios.
And if you're prepping for tech, you know the struggle. You read a regulation, and it just feels like a wall of text.
A very dry wall of text.
Right. But today, we're going to look at the macro logic. Like, why do these rules exist? How do they actually connect? And more importantly, what is the clinical fallout when a technical sergeant drops the ball and fails to apply them?
Yeah, the administrative wreckage.
Exactly. So let's start with the baseline requirement for the entire military apparatus, which is the human weapon system. Chapter 22 deals with the physical fitness program. And right out of the gate, the text just dumps an absolute alphabet soup of acronyms on you.
It really does. But, the bureaucracy of the physical fitness program, or PFP, it's dense because it has to account for the medical and physical variability of hundreds of thousands of humans.
Right.
As a technical sergeant, you are the crucial node in this network. Let's ground this in a clinical scenario. You have an airman in your flight, maybe a senior airman, who tweaks their lower back during a weekend move.
Okay, pretty common.
It's very common. The administrative clock starts ticking immediately. Who do they notify? Who documents it?
Well, if I'm a TSGT, I know I'm not a doctor. I can't just tell them to, take some ibuprofen and take it easy. They have to go to the MTF, the military treatment facility. That's the first piece of the puzzle, right?
Right.
The MTF provider evaluates the injury and generates the AF Form 469, the duty limiting condition report. And this form is, it's the absolute epicenter of the medical readiness system.
It is. The AF Form 469 is a legal and a medical shield.
Yeah.
But it's entirely useless if the relationship logic between the unit and the installation isn't maintained.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning once that form is generated, the airman must immediately notify the UFPM, the Unit Fitness Program Manager.
Okay, the UFPM.
Yes, the UFPM is the administrative liaison. They sit right between the unit commander, the medical providers, and the installation's testing authorities. They initiate the PFP case files, and they input those medical exemptions into the MyFitness system.
I always try to visualize these roles to keep them straight in my head. I look at the UFPM as kind of like the unit's athletic director. They handle the scheduling, the compliance tracking, making sure the paperwork is clean. But they aren't the ones out on the turf blowing the whistle.
No, they're not.
That operational execution, that falls to the PTL, the physical training leader.
Exactly. The PTL is the sharp end of the spear for unit-level readiness. They lead the physical training exercises, and they are certified to administer the fitness assessments. But here's a strict Level B system constraint that you must interpret correctly.
Okay, lay it on me.
A PTL must maintain a passing fitness assessment score of 75.0 or higher themselves.
Wait, so if they drop below that?
The moment their score drops below 75, or honestly, if they simply go non-current because they missed their testing month, their certification is immediately voided.
Wow, instant.
Instantly. They are administratively stripped of their authority to lead. The macro logic here is foundational to military leadership, you know. You cannot enforce a standard that you personally fail to meet.
That makes total sense. And then we have the official referee for the installation, the FAC, or the fitness assessment cell.
Right.
They operate under the Force Support Squadron. They're centralized, impartial, and they oversee the official testing. So let's tie this back to our senior airmen with the bad back. They have the AF Form 469 from the MTF. What is the TSGT's responsibility here? Because, I mean, it seems like the airman just needs to hand the form to the FAC and just be done with it.
And that assumption is exactly how administrative wreckage occurs.
Really?
Yes. The TSGT must apply Level C leadership here. You do not assume the airman knows the routing matrix. The airman must provide a copy of that AF Form 469 to the FAC staff prior to taking the assessment. If you, as the supervisor, fail to track that chain of custody, the fallout is severe.
So walk me through that fallout. What actually happens if that piece of paper doesn't make it to the FAC?
The clinical reality is pretty grim. The airman shows up to the FAC. The FAC has no record of the exemption in my fitness because, let's say, the UFPM wasn't notified and the airman doesn't have the physical form on them.
Oh, no.
Right. The airman, feeling pressured, attempts the assessment injured. They fail. That failure is immediately recorded in the system. The commander is notified, and this triggers a cascade of punitive administrative actions.
Like what kind of actions?
It can result in a referral performance report, placement on a control roster, or ultimately administrative separation. And it all stems from a technical sergeant failing to ensure a single piece of paper reached the correct bureaucratic node.
Man, that is the difference between level A memorization and level C application right there. Memorizing what an AF Form 469 is won't save your airman's career.
Yeah.
Ensuring it gets handed to the FAC will.
Exactly.
And speaking of massive shifts in the fitness culture, we really have to talk about the body composition program, the BCP, because the Air Force completely decoupled body composition from the standard physical fitness test. They killed the old abdominal tape test and moved to the WHTR, the waist-to-height ratio.
Yeah, this was a massive systemic overhaul mandated by Department of Defense Instruction UC 28.03, which was implemented in January 2023. The macro logic behind decoupling it from the physical fitness assessment was to separate physical performance from physical anthropometry.
Which means separating how fast you can run from your body shape.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The new metric, the WHTR, is calculated by simply dividing the individual's waist circumference by their height.
And the numbers on this are very rigid. A ratio of less than 0.55 means you are meeting standard, which places you in the low to moderate risk category for health issues.
Right.
But if your ratio is greater than 0.55, you are not meeting standard, and you're categorized as high risk. But here's where I want to push back, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
When this rolled out, the Air Force implemented a massive one-year adaptation period, which they even extended to April 2024. If this is a Department of Defense health mandate, why wait? Like, why not just start enforcing the 0.55 standard on day one and process the separations for anyone who fails? Doesn't a delay signal that the standard isn't really that important?
I get that perspective, but on the contrary, the delay signals an understanding of systemic survival.
Systemic survival?
Yes. If you implement a brand new physiological metric and instantly tie it to punitive administrative separation, you will hollow out your force structure overnight. You will discharge thousands of technically proficient mechanics, cyber operators, and logisticians based on a measurement they have never been trained to manage.
Oh, I see.
The adaptation period was a calculated shift from punitive enforcement to developmental intervention. It allowed the force to actually calibrate.
Okay, that makes sense from a retention standpoint. You don't want to lose your best maintainer just because they need time to adapt to a new bodily metric. So how does that developmental intervention actually work? If I have an airman who tapes at a, say, 0.58 during that adaptation phase, what is my move as a TSGT?
You enroll them in the Informal Self-Directed Body Composition Improvement Program, or BCIP. This informal phase lasts for 12 months. You utilize the DA Form 108, which is the Fitness Education and Intervention Processing Form, to document this.
Okay, the DA Form 108.
Right, and here is the crucial Level B distinction you must understand. Enrollment in this informal BCIP is clinically recorded, but is not considered an official failure to meet the BCP standard. Commanders are barred from taking administrative action during this informal phase. It is entirely about education and correction.
But the grace period ends.
Oh, it absolutely ends. If the airman fails to achieve a ratio under 0.55 after that 12-month informal period, the system shifts from developmental to punitive. They are then enrolled in the formal, self-directed BCIP.
And that's when it goes on their record.
Yes. That formal enrollment is clinically recorded as the first official failure. From that point, assuming the MTF has ruled out any underlying medical conditions, repeated failures escalate linearly toward administrative separation. A technical sergeant must perfectly articulate this timeline to their personnel. The airman must understand exactly when the safety net vanishes.
So let's transition from body composition back to the actual physical fitness assessment, the PFA, because executing the test itself is governed by strict, inflexible rules. The text outlines a mandatory 3-hour window to complete all components on the exact same day.
The execution of the PFA operates on a very rigid sequence. It is not a menu, it's a mandate.
Okay, what's the order?
First, body composition. Even though it is decoupled from the score, it is measured first. Second, muscular strength, which gives the option of traditional 1-minute push-ups or 2-minute hand-release push-ups. Third is core endurance, offering 1-minute sit-ups, the 2-minute cross-leg reverse crunch, or the forearm plank. Finally, the cardiorespiratory fitness component, which is the 1.5-mile run, the 20-meter-high aerobic multi-shuttle run, or for those with a specific AF Form 469 profile, the 2-kilometer walk.
And between those components, there's a mandatory 5-minute rest period.
Correct.
I've always found the weather rules fascinating too. Let's say your flight finishes the strength and core components, everyone is feeling good, and then a massive thunderstorm rolls in with lightning within 5 miles. The FAC shuts down the track. They can't just tell you to come back in 4 hours and run your 1.5 miles, right?
But regulation strictly forbids that.
Really? So what happens?
If severe weather or an unforeseen emergency interrupts the assessment, the FAC cannot simply pause the clock. The entire assessment is voided.
You have to do the push-ups again.
All components must be completely rescheduled and executed again at the earliest opportunity. The system requires a snapshot of an airman's physical capacity within a continuous, unbroken 3-hour block. Breaking that block invalidates the data.
That's brutal, but I see the logic. Now let's look at the scoring. This is a trap I see junior enlisted fall into all the time, and a TSGD needs to be able to explain the math here.
Yes, the math is tricky.
Because the minimums for each component are highly deceptive. I look at the PFA scoring like the structural pillars of a bridge. You have the cardio pillar, which is worth 60 points total. The upper body pillar is worth 20 points, and the core pillar is worth 20 points. To pass the test, you need an overall composite score of 75. But if you just hit the bare minimum requirement for all 3 pillars, what happens?
The bridge collapses.
Exactly.
If you achieve the absolute minimum passing value in the cardio, strength, and core components, your cumulative score will mathematically fall short of the 75 points required. The minimums simply prevent an automatic, immediate failure of the assessment.
They just keep you in the game.
Right, they keep you in the game. But to actually pass the assessment, you must significantly exceed the minimums in at least one, if not multiple categories, to generate the necessary 75 points. A technical sergeant must review an airman's mock test scores and highlight this mathematical reality before the official test.
Because if they aim for the minimums, they will fail.
They absolutely do fail.
And the timeline for retesting is entirely dictated by that final composite score. If you hit an excellent, which is a 90 or above, you buy yourself 12 months before you have to test again. But there's a huge asterisk there regarding medical profiles.
Yes, and missing this caveat results in non-current airmen. If an individual scores a 90 or above, but they were medically exempt from what the components say, they were in a profile that exempted them from the run, they do not get the 12-month pass.
So they have to retest sooner.
Unless they're on a chronic, permanent profile, they must retest in 6 months.
Got it. And if you score a satisfactory, which is anywhere from 75 to 89.9, you're on a 6-month retest cycle. And if you get an unsatisfactory, anything below a 75, or if you fail to hit even one of those minimum bridge pillars we talked about, you must retest within 90 days.
That's the system.
But as we discussed earlier, readiness isn't just about how many push-ups you can do. The human weapon system doesn't just break physically, it breaks mentally.
And this is perhaps the most critical Level C application for any non-commissioned officer. A technical sergeant might have a flight full of airmen scoring 90s on their PFA, projecting an image of total readiness. But physical stamina does not insulate an individual from psychological crisis.
Absolutely not.
When an airman is drowning in a financial disaster, a brutal divorce, or profound depression, the mission is equally compromised. Chapter 22 codified the ACE model for suicide prevention.
Ask, care, escort. I want to break this down because it sounds like a simple acronym, but executing it in real time is incredibly difficult.
It's very difficult.
The ask phase requires total directness. You don't dance around the issue. You don't ask, are you feeling down? You calmly and explicitly ask, are you thinking of killing or hurting yourself? It goes against every instinct we have to be polite or avoid awkwardness.
Politeness in a crisis is a vulnerability.
Wow. Yeah.
The ask phase is designed to shatter ambiguity. The care phase then requires active, non-judgmental listening. You are not there to solve their problems or debate the validity of their feelings. You are there to absorb the information and maintain engagement.
Right.
But the ultimate point of failure, where the system logic demands flawless execution, is the escort phase.
The text is absolute on this. Never leave a distressed airman alone.
The clinical reality of suicide prevention is often about logistics. The escort phase is entirely focused on establishing physical time and space between a distressed individual and lethal means, firearms, medications, vehicles.
You have to physically insert yourself.
You physically escort them to their commander, to emergency medical services, or to professional mental health support. If they violently refuse to go, you do not back down. You contact the chain of command or dial 911 immediately. You remain in physical proximity until professional support assumes custody. Leaving it to chance or trusting that they will sleep it off is a catastrophic failure of leadership.
And this holistic view of the airman ties directly into the Comprehensive Airman Fitness framework, the CAF. The military finally realized that you can't just manage the physical body. The CAF has 4 domains: mental, physical, social, and spiritual.
Yes, the 4 domains.
We've hit physical and mental. Social is about connectedness, unit cohesion, and preventing isolation. But the spiritual domain often confuses people because, it doesn't mean you have to go to church.
No, the text explicitly defines the spiritual domain outside of strict religious parameters. It is defined as strengthening a set of beliefs, principles, or values that sustain an individual's sense of well-being and purpose.
It's like your internal compass.
Exactly. When an airman loses their why, when they lose their connection to the mission or to their own core values, their resilience shatters. The CAF framework is the systemic glue. If one of those 4 pillars crumbles, the entire human weapon system is compromised.
But all of this internal readiness, the mental resilience, the core values, the passing WHTR score, it doesn't mean anything to the civilian driving past the base gate. They don't see your CIF domains.
They see your uniform.
They see your uniform. Physical and mental readiness are internal, but the military operates on visible authority. That is our transition into Chapter 23, Dress and Appearance, which is governed by DAPI 36-2903.
And for a technical sergeant, enforcing DFI 36-2903 is not an exercise in pedantry. It is the enforcement of visual discipline.
It's not just about looking pretty.
No. The text states clearly that standards of dress provide visible examples of self-discipline, commitment, and a willingness to set aside individuality for the betterment of the whole. When you allow an airman to present a degraded image, you are actively degrading the public and internal perception of the force's operational competence.
The regulation lists 5 core elements of dress and appearance: neatness, cleanliness, safety, uniformity, and military image. Uniformity and military image are where the Air Force draws some incredibly hard lines, specifically regarding physical body modifications. And we aren't just talking about a messy haircut here.
We're analyzing intentional, severe alterations to the human body. The text strictly prohibits intentional alterations that result in a visible physical effect that disfigures, deforms, or otherwise detracts from a professional military image. This is a non-negotiable standard.
The examples the text provides are visceral: tongue splitting, tooth filing, and gauging. If you aren't familiar, gauging is the practice of piercing holes in the earlobes and gradually stretching them so large that light can shine through the lobe.
Yes, it's extreme.
Why is the Air Force so absolute about this? Is it just old-fashioned conservatism? Why do they care if someone has a split tongue if they can fix a jet engine?
It is entirely about the subversion of uniformity. The military relies on interchangeability and a unified front. Severe physical modifications are aggressive assertions of extreme individuality. They disrupt the visual cohesion of the unit.
They break the image.
Right. The clinical fallout for an airman who engages in these modifications is not a simple counseling session or a slap on the wrist. The text dictates that members who intentionally alter their bodies in this manner may be subject to severe disciplinary action or involuntary administrative separation. They are removed from the system because they refuse to visually integrate into it.
Man, that's heavy. Let's decode the primary uniform of the day, the OCP, the Operational Camouflage Pattern. Because this uniform is a masterclass in visual regulation. What always stands out to me is the obsession with one specific thread color, spice brown. Almost the entire uniform relies on it.
The name tapes, the U.S. Air Force tapes, the enlisted rank insignia, they're all embroidered in spice brown. But a technical sergeant cannot just memorize the rule. They must memorize the exceptions. Failing to recognize the exceptions in the field leads to severe breaches of military customs and courtesies.
Right. The officer ranks, this goes back to my example at the very beginning of the deep dive, first lieutenants and lieutenant colonels do not wear spice brown rank insignia on their OCPs. They wear a black thread.
Exactly.
Why? Because if you embroider a second lieutenant's single bar in spice brown and a first lieutenant's single bar in spice brown, they are virtually indistinguishable from 20 feet away.
They blend right in.
The same goes for the major's oak leaf and the lieutenant colonel's oak leaf. The black thread is a visual failsafe. It ensures that junior personnel can instantly recognize the rank and render the proper salute and greeting.
Now, let us analyze the patch geography on the OCP sleeve and chest. It is a rigidly codified puzzle. Above the U.S. Air Force tape, an individual is authorized to wear a maximum of 4 occupational qualification or skill badges. However, the placement is dictated by a strict hierarchy, not personal preference.
The mandatory badges claim the prime real estate. If you have earned a chaplain, aeronautical, space, cyberspace, multi-domain warfare, or missile operations badge, the regulation mandates that it must be worn in the highest position on the chest. You can't put your cyber badge at the bottom just because you think it looks better there.
Furthermore, if an individual possesses multiple badges from that mandatory category, the badge representing their current primary duty position takes the absolute highest spot. The system visually broadcasts exactly what your primary capability is.
And the sleeves are an even more complex puzzle. Left sleeve versus right sleeve. What is the logic here?
The right sleeve is primarily designated for the United States flag, which must always face forward, giving the effect of the flag flying in the breeze as the wearer moves forward, and organizational unit patches. The left sleeve, however, is highly regulated for functional identification and higher headquarters alignment.
The left sleeve is where we see the duty identifier patches.
Yep.
These are placed at the very top of the left sleeve Velcro. They're restricted to a maximum of 5 letters. You see things like cyber, med, fire, or SF for security forces.
Right.
But the text notes a very specific critical visual cue regarding the borders of these patches.
This is a level C comprehension test. Duty identifier patches for first responders or specific career fields that require instantaneous identification during a crisis feature a black border.
A black border, okay.
If a technical sergeant is managing a chaotic scene on the flight line, say a fuel spill or a medical emergency, and they see an individual with a black border duty identifier, they immediately know that person possesses specialized operational authority for that specific crisis. It removes the need for introductions or credential checks. The uniform communicates the authority.
Moving from the tactical environment of the OCP to the formal environment of the office, we have to unpack the Class A service dress and the Class B blue uniform. To the untrained eye, blues look sharp. To a TSGT, they look like a mathematical equation that has to be balanced perfectly.
The precise measurements of the Class A code are designed to project a uniform silhouette across varied body types. The geometry is non-negotiable.
Like the sleeves, right?
Yes. With the wearer's arms hanging naturally at their sides, the sleeves of the service dress coat must end exactly 1/4 to 1/2 inch below the wrist. Simultaneously, the collar of the light blue shirt worn underneath must be visible exactly 1/4 to 1/2 inch above the service dress coat collar in the back.
I always think of the Class A coat as a wearable resume. But it's a resume where the margins have to be perfect. How does a TSGT navigate the rules of badge placement? Because depending on how many qualifications an airman has, the chest can get very crowded.
The placement tells the chronological and functional story of an airman's career, but it operates on strict mathematical spacing. On the Class A coat, the first occupational badge is centered exactly 1/2 inch above the top row of ribbons. If the individual has earned a second occupational badge, it is centered 1/2 inch above the first one.
And what about duty badges? These are the larger badges, like the Security Forces Shield or a recruiting badge. Where do those go?
This is where you must account for the variations in uniform tailoring between male and female cuts. For males wearing the Class A coat, the first duty badge is centered on the wearer's left side, exactly 1½ inches below the top of the welt pocket.
And for females?
For females, because the coat lacks that welt pocket, the first duty badge is centered on the wearer's right side, exactly 1/2 inch above the name tag. The spacing rules adapt to the garment to maintain visual balance, but the precision remains identical.
The ribbons themselves are the most intricate part of this wearable resume. You aren't just looking at colorful blocks, you are looking at the hierarchy of metals and devices. This is where you can read an airman's history like a book if you know the language.
The ribbons denote the metal, but the small metallic devices attached to those ribbons provide the granular context. They denote specific conditions of the award or multiple occurrences. The absolute order of precedence for these specific operational devices, from highest to lowest consequence, is the V for valor, the C for combat conditions, and the R for remote impacts.
Let's break that down. If an airman has a ribbon that they earned 3 separate times, once for an act of valor under fire, once for operating in a combat zone, and once for a remote drone strike impact, and they wear all 3 devices on that single ribbon, how are they arranged?
The devices are placed according to precedence, reading from the wearer's right to their left. Therefore, you place the V closest to the center of the chest, followed by the C, and finally the R. Furthermore, the text details the evolutionary scale of devices that denote multiple awards of the same metal.
Right, it's not just about adding more and more little metal oak leaf clusters until the ribbon is covered. There's a consolidation system.
Exactly. Your first award of a specific metal with a V, C, or R device utilizes a bronze device. The second award of that exact same metal under those conditions upgrades that single device to silver. The third award upgrades it to gold. The fourth award is represented by a bronze device surrounded by a metallic wreath.
So if a TSGT is sitting on a promotion board or just looking at a senior NCO's rack and they see a gold V surrounded by a wreath on a specific ribbon, they aren't just looking at a piece of flair. They know they are looking at someone who has been awarded that specific medal for valorous actions 6 distinct times. The amount of operational history compressed into a half-inch of metal is staggering.
Before we leave Chapter 23, we must address the specialty uniforms, as they are heavily restricted. Specifically, the maintenance duty uniform, the MDU, and the flight duty uniform, the FDU. The MDU is the sage green coverall authorized for specific maintenance, civil engineering, and logistics career fields. It is unit funded.
But you can't just wear it wherever you want, right? I've seen airmen get chewed out for wearing their MDU at the base exchange food court.
And rightfully so. The system logic dictates that the MDU is a functional industrial garment. It is designed to get covered in hydraulic fluid and grease. It is strictly for industrial areas, flight lines, hangars, and warehouses.
So no grocery shopping in it.
The regulation permits wearing the MDU while transiting directly to and from your domicile to your duty station, and for brief convenience stops on the installation. However, the text explicitly prohibits wearing the MDU to eat in restaurants where most diners wear business attire, or at any establishment that operates primarily to serve alcohol. It is not a public relations uniform, it is a work garment, and its geographical footprint is tightly contained.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the flight duty uniform, the FDU, and specifically the highly coveted leather A2 flying jacket.
The wear of the A2 jacket is perhaps one of the most guarded uniform privileges in the Air Force. It is authorized via AFM I-11402, strictly for rated officers, pilots, navigators, career enlisted aviators, and specific space and missile crews who have completed rigorous qualification training.
So basically, if you aren't flying or operating space and missile tech, don't buy one.
If an individual does not fall into one of those specific operational categories, they cannot wear the A2. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force is the sole approval authority for issuing the A2 to anyone outside those parameters. It is an enduring heritage item that visually distinguishes the aviation and operational corps.
That concept of heritage is the perfect pivot point. We have covered the physical survival aspects of the human weapon system. We've covered the external projection of discipline through uniform standards. But fitness and uniforms are individual components. Chapter 24 is military customs and courtesies. This is the systemic glue. This is what takes thousands of individuals and binds them into a functional hierarchical machine.
This domain is where the ADTC chart demands absolute level C application from a technical sergeant. You must execute respect, courtesy, and tradition in real time. If you fail to apply these customs, you introduce profound friction into the chain of command. Let us examine the spatial geometry of respect. the text outlines the concept of the position of honor.
The position of honor is an ancient military concept. It dictates that the senior person is always given the position on the right. If you are walking down the street with a captain, you, as the TSGT, walk on their left. The senior leader is on the right. It seems simple, but when you apply it to dynamic situations like getting into a vehicle, it turns into a tactical puzzle.
It is a puzzle that is easily solved if you apply the logic of the rule flawlessly. When multiple personnel are entering a vehicle, the junior person enters the vehicle first. They enter the rear seating area and slide all the way over to the left side. The senior person enters the vehicle last, taking the position of honor on the right side.
And when the vehicle arrives at the destination,
The process reverses, maintaining the logic. The senior person, who is already positioned by the door on the right, exits the vehicle first. The junior personnel follow.
oh, that makes sense.
This choreographed movement eliminates confusion, hesitation, or awkward shuffling at the vehicle door. It is a codified procedure that ensures seamless transit for senior leadership.
Let's talk about saluting. Everyone knows you salute an officer outdoors, but the text goes into deep, specific detail about saluting nuances during military funerals and memorials. There is a lot of movement at a funeral, and a TSG-8 needs to know exactly when to render honors.
At a military funeral or memorial, if you are in uniform, the requirements are absolute. You must render a salute to the caisson or the hearse as it passes your position. You must salute the casket as it is being carried past you by the pallbearers. You maintain a salute during the firing of the ceremonial volleys, and you maintain a salute during the playing of taps.
But there is a massive caveat regarding taps that is a classic trap for junior NCOs.
Taps isn't only played at funerals.
Precisely. Many military installations play taps over the base-wide loudspeaker system at the end of the day, usually around 2100 or coming 200 hours, to signify lights out or the end of the duty day.
Right, you hear it all over base.
The text explicitly states that for these routine daily lights out broadcasts, a salute is not required. You only render a salute for taps when it is part of a funeral or memorial ceremony. Knowing the contextual difference prevents you from freezing in the base exchange parking lot at 2100 hours.
Let's unpack the mechanics of drill. Moving a formation of 50 humans from point A to point B without them tripping over each other requires mathematical precision. Chapter 24 codifies this. The physical standards are rigid to ensure uniformity of movement. The standard marching step is exactly 24 inches, measured from heel to heel. The standard cadence, or rate of march, is between 100 to 120 steps per minute. But the physical metrics are secondary to the cognitive psychology of the drill command. This is what a technical sergeant must truly master to move a flight effectively.
The two-part command. Everything relies on this binary structure.
Every effective drill command consists of two distinct components, the preparatory command and the command of execution. The preparatory command, such as calling out the specific flight designation like flight or giving a directional warning like right, serves to alert the brain. It identifies exactly who is being addressed and primes their cognitive processing for the upcoming action.
It's the get-ready signal, but it doesn't cause the movement.
Correct. The movement is solely triggered by the command of execution, such as halt or face. You cannot merge these two commands.
Like saying right face, all is one word.
If a TSGT slurs them together, the formation will fracture. You must project the preparatory command to prime the group, pause for a fraction of a second to allow that processing, and then sharply deliver the execution command to trigger the synchronized motor response. It is behavioral programming executed through vocal projection.
Which brings us to the ultimate behavioral tradition, the preservation of military heritage. Chapter 24 highlights a deeply significant enlisted tradition, the Order of the Sword. In a military that is entirely structured around a top-down, officer-led hierarchy, the Order of the Sword is completely inverted.
The Order of the Sword is fascinating precisely because it subverts the standard chain of command logic. It is the absolute highest honor that the enlisted force can bestow upon a senior leader. It is not an award given down from a general. It is an induction granted upwards from the enlisted corps to recognize a leader, usually an officer or a senior civilian, who has provided conspicuous and outstanding support to the enlisted ranks.
The text describes the recipient as a leader among leaders and an airman among airmen. And because this is the ultimate enlisted honor, the enlisted force guards the process fiercely. An officer can't just nominate another officer for this.
It is exclusively owned and operated by the top tier of the enlisted structure. The only approved levels for the award of the sword are at the headquarters Air Force level and the Major Command, or MAJCOM level. The Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force and the respective MAJCOM command chiefs serve as the official keepers of the sword. They maintain the official lists and oversee the induction ceremonies. It is a powerful mechanism for the enlisted force to assert its values and recognize those who champion their welfare.
And finally, applying Level C comprehension means preserving this history for the next generation. A TSGT has to connect their brand new airmen to the legacy they are inheriting. Chapter 24 points to a specific physical location for this.
The text recognizes the Air Force Enlisted Heritage Research Institute and Museum located at Maxwell Air Force Base, Gunter Annex in Alabama.
Have you ever been?
It is a massive repository housing over 200,000 original documents, artifacts, and exhibits. It is the only museum in the entire Air Force that is strictly enlisted-centric. Its mission is to preserve the history of the enlisted corps and to teach the critical importance of enlisted contributions to the development of air power. A technical sergeant must be aware of this resource, not just as a piece of trivia, but as a tool to instill institutional pride in their subordinates.
So, if you are listening to this on your commute or staring at your study materials, what does this all mean? We've decoded the text, we've looked at the fitness regulations that ensure physical and mental survival, we've looked at the uniform standards that project visual discipline and operational authority, and we've analyzed the customs and courtesies that bind the unit together. The leap from staff sergeant to technical sergeant isn't about memorizing acronyms. It's about understanding the why, that relationship logic of level B, and flawlessly executing the how, leadership application of level C.
If you fail to understand the relationship between the UFPM, the medical profile, and the FAC, you don't just get a question wrong on a test. You ruin an airman's career trajectory and generate administrative wreckage for your commander. If you fail to enforce the strict measurements of the OCP patch placement or the prohibition on body modifications, you actively erode the visual authority of the force. If you fail to apply the geometry of respect or the psychology of a drill command, you introduce friction and chaos into the operational environment. The system logic demands compliance because the system relies on it for survival.
It's like being the mechanic for a high-performance jet. The pilot flies it, but you are the one ensuring the landing gear deploys. As a TSGT, you are the mechanic of the human weapon system. You are the one maintaining the health and the discipline of the unit.
I will leave you with a final thought to mull over. A purely clinical observation. Think about the civilian organizations, corporations, or community groups you interact with outside the military installation. How often do those organizations fail or fracture? Not because they lack financial resources or talented individuals, but because they lack a clear command of execution. How often do their meetings dissolve into chaotic arguments because they lack a codified position of honor or a defined hierarchy of respect?
All the time. You see it constantly in the civilian world. People talking over each other, no one knowing who has the final say, everyone bumping into each other at the metaphorical and sometimes literal door.
Exactly. The military's absolute obsession with these granular, seemingly pedantic details, the 24-inch marching step, the 1/4-inch collar visibility, the exact spice brown thread color of a rank insignia, the immediate routing of an AF Form 469, it might seem absurd to an outsider. But it is actually the ultimate psychological shortcut. It is designed to entirely remove the cognitive load of basic existence during a crisis. When every single individual knows exactly where to stand, exactly what to wear, exactly how to speak, and exactly how to process a failure, all of that freed up mental energy can be focused entirely ruthlessly and clinically on executing the mission. Understand the logic, enforce the standard, and protect the system.